Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Mary Lauder, and you are listening to the Since You Put It That Way podcast. It's the show that examines various health, wellness, and medical topics from unique perspectives. We will be having discussions and guests that will cause you to pause and consider, well, since you put it that way. My guest today on the podcast, Since You Put It That Way, is Amanda Archibald. She is a registered dietitian who is widely recognized as an early adopter in translational genomics. This connects genomics and nutritional science with everyday health. Amanda is the founder at the Genomic Kitchen, which showcases the relationship between genes, food, health, and that translated then that information into the kitchen. We might even call that culinary genomics. Amanda is the author of 2 books, one of which she has with her today called The Genomic Kitchen. She's an accomplished clinician, educator, consultant, and public health advocate. Amanda teaches and mentors clinicians around the world in her efforts to make nutritional and culinary genomics more widely understood and accessible. She's equally sought out in private practice setting using genomics to guide individuals with complex health challenges on a journey into their wellness. As an avid collaborator, Amanda recently co-created a company and program called C-Suite, which is a DNA-driven holistic health and well-being executive program for the United Kingdom. She has led institutional and corporate consulting by using Nutrigenomics for a number of inspired corporate innovators, including Sodexo, which is in the United States, and Hawkins Watts, which is in New Zealand. Her side-by-side work in the kitchen and boardroom with the Sodexo chefs, food service, and medical professionals resulted in the successful launch of the world's first nutrigenomically inspired menu that was offered to patients, guests, and hospital staff at Sharp Healthcare in San Diego. Now, this is groundbreaking because we all know what hospital food is like, right? So she's literally brought culinary medicine into the clinical world. So she's definitely a leader in this. Originally from the United Kingdom, Amanda currently resides in the high desert mountains of Western Colorado. So welcome today, Amanda. Check her out at her website, genomickitchen.com, genomickitchen.com. Welcome. Here we go. So welcome, Amanda. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. And it's so good to be back with you.
Yes, we've done this
old friends.
Times. Yes. I think our last was 2020. Mm-hmm. That was, I think we were just into the lockdown at that time.
We were. And what's interesting is at that time you were in Colorado still, I think. Yeah. And I was in Wisconsin, right? So I was, the other side of the lake from you. And now we're talking to each other and I'm back in Colorado and you're in Michigan. So we switched.
Yes, we did. Yes. So yes, I tell people I came from the Midwest. I've got the Wild West in me. So I'm a good blend of the 2 cultures. So yes. Yeah. You're back on the Western slope.
I'm on the Western slope of Colorado and love it. Yes.
Yeah. Different than the hustle and bustle, right?
Well, it is. And, for your listeners, but people don't know what's the Western slope. Well, if you're in Colorado, the water flows east and west, right? And so I'm on the Western side and the water flows to the west. So we're the ones with the Colorado River, right? Where we're watching it flow past our backyard full of water from the Gunnison River and the Colorado and looking at it go up and down and think, well, what are you all going to do? In Utah and Arizona, like save your water. We have it here, but it's an interesting place to live. But it's also, as you said, it's different from where we were in Boulder in that it's high desert here. So I can see the mountains of San Juan's. It's beautiful, but we have canyon country. So it's gorgeous. Yeah. It's the flora and fauna is different. The skiing's different, but it's awesome. So I love it.
It's a beautiful part of Colorado that is not as populated, but it is a well-kept secret, I would say.
It is.
It is. Yeah. So, we're going to go into this topic. I'm getting ready to launch a program that I've been just working on for a long time called the Hero's Genome.
Mhm.
And we began our work, you and I, together on genomics, I think around 2017. I'm thinking 2018.
Yeah. We were deep into it. Yes.
Yeah. And we really found looking at how the human genome, working that in a clinical fashion, can be very applicable for precision medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's where we were then and now. But how did you start out? Tell me your story. How did you get into genomics? Where did you come from? What's your
Right.
career evolved like? What's it been?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, like you said, I'm trained as a dietitian, and I came through a very conventional program, which means kind of nuts and bolts. And yes, I had a very good background in nutritional biochemistry, but I don't know when you were in medical school, when we were taught nutritional biochemistry, we were taught these molecules and how they changed,
Yes.
in cycles, but we were never taught what does it look like in practice? And so, conventional is like, yeah, carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals, here's how to read a food label. I mean, I'm being very pedantic here, but I was very unhappy with my training. I have a deep interest in the science. I grew up in Europe. I was very interested in food. So consequently, when I graduated with my degree here, I have a degree from Europe, but this is from the United States. I felt that I had some form of expertise in nutrition science, but nobody was connecting the dots between nutrition science and the culinary arts. Like, okay, well, what do? You tell someone, okay, eat this, eat that, but how are they going to do it if they don't know how to cook? So
Right.
we were graduating people who, like I said, had a degree in the science, but they weren't helping people put food on the table or saying, when you eat this ingredient, this is how it works in your body. This is why Dr. Loud is mentioning this, and this is why Amanda's talking about this. So I went through quite a long time in my career where I really was not actually working in the clinical space because I couldn't see the application. I thought we were wasting our time. Kind of like maybe in conventional medicine, you're just like on this hamster wheel trying to help people, but we're not actually getting them to well. So long story short, because of where I was in my career, I did a lot of consulting work. I happened to be in South Africa teaching a group of dietitians how to understand how your patients perceive flavor. So in other words, and this is interesting, Mary. So in other words, when you and I tell people to eat kale because it's good for them, right? Or Brussels sprouts or what have you, if they have taste receptors, which, genetically driven, that make them super sensitive to sulfury or very savory notes, they're going to eat sweet food. And they're not lying to you. It's how their genes are. So long before I knew genetics, I was teaching people the power, or clinicians, the power of understanding where somebody's palate is. Because they're not going to eat kale because you say they need to, because they don't even know where to start with it. So we did a lot of flavor and taste work, like wine tasting, but I did it with food.
Yeah.
The reason I mention that is because I ran into that conference, we were in Johannesburg, to a gal who's an expert in nutrigenetics, how our genes react to food is a way to look at it, or react to our environment. So the impact of environment, which can be food, mood, exercise, on our genes. So disruption in those genes influence how you're going to deal with food and nutrition, et cetera. And anyway, she said, oh my gosh, the way you present science, because I use actually roadmaps and a lot of visual techniques and tasting techniques. She said, we need that in genetics because nobody understands it. It's so complex, and it's a certain mind that can do the work you and I do, Mary, to be honest with you, Dr. Loud and Mary. So she said, I need to write a course in nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics, and the way you explain things, can you be part of this team? So long story short, I did join with her and another brilliant researcher who I work with in Australia, genius. And we started to work together, and we started to work on this course. But in the end, like, we were in 3 different countries, it didn't quite work out together. But she got me thinking about a different way to understand nutrition science, which is, like you said, nutrigenomics, this world of genomics. And I was hooked, because it pulled us deeply into rigorous science. It pulled me back into genes do this in your body, and they direct biochemistry, which is your operating system. Yeah. And when we read genetic information, like Hero's genome or the tests we're reading, we can literally see where the inefficiencies might be in
Mhm.
how you're operating internally. And that directs the prescription. It directs the scientific prescription. It directs the nutrition prescription. It directs the culinary prescription, the exercise, the emotional prescription. And I found my space. And the space is not for everyone. I think you and I agree. This is an area of science that requires really rigorous study.
Yes.
But it also has an artistic side to it, which is the ability to recognize patterns.
Yes.
Which, is the hardest thing for clinicians to learn. Those who get it, we exponentially can help people feel better faster.
Yes.
Because we're getting right to the root or the dust in the corner of how your body's operating, clearing that out.
Yes.
And getting people back on track. And it is probably the most brilliant part of nutrition and medicine that I think I've seen in my career. And so that's my journey. And I can't imagine working in any other discipline than this.
Yeah. Yes, I think your work's absolutely valuable. And I think I actually think it's the way healthcare needs to go.
Mm-hmm.
Because we talk about, so what I learned in medical school about nutrition, we might as well just escort the crickets in and make noises. Nothing. I think maybe 5 hours, honestly, 5 hours 1 week, an hour a day, Monday through Friday. But we had biochemistry and we had pharmacology. But again, I was the student in medical school who raised my hand when they said, well, this is essential hypertension. And somewhere around age 4, do we know that magnesium drops in the body? And I go, well, should we just give them magnesium instead of a beta blocker? Mm-hmm. They're like, okay, no, put your hand down. Don't ask any more questions. And I'm like, well, shouldn't we look at, well, why? And then the follow-up question was, well, why are they low in magnesium?
Right.
Well, doesn't magnesium do a lot of things? That was the third question, to which then I was, kindly asked to be quiet. So, but that same thing for how I practice medicine was looking at the whys and the hows and the root causes. And then when I got exposed to nutrigenomics, it was a patient, actually just genomics. It was a patient who brought their test in who had a diagnosis of breast cancer. And she said, I need you to help me restore my health and do well through my treatment. And I'm like, well, I have no clue how to do this. And she goes, yeah, but you're smart. I go, yeah, thanks. But I still have no clue how to do it.
Right. I have no idea. It's like looking at computer code. It really is.
Yeah. And so then, but as you mentioned, seeing the patterns and then knowing functional medicine, knowing holistic integrative medicine, and being an osteopath, the body has the inherent capacity to heal. I'm like, oh, wait, there might be something here. Mm-hmm. And looking. And then all of a sudden it clicked. I'm like, how can a person think any differently?
Exactly. And, you mentioned like this key point that you said when you were in medicals. I was a mature student. You were meaning I went back to school again when I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And I was that person asking questions just like you. And I wasn't told to be quiet, but I think I was reaching beyond the curriculum, but the reason I'm sort of going back there is you said the question was about hypertension. Well, shouldn't we look at what the root cause is? Maybe magnesium inefficiency or deficiency, or the biothermin cycle or whatever isn't working efficiently. And we now know to come to genomics, if you have a certain form of gene, like a TT form of your ACE inhibitor gene, you can't tolerate beta blockers very well. You'll do horribly. Now, of course, that's outside of my scope of practice, but we know this. I would flip that over to doctors and say, if the patient isn't feeling well, maybe.
Right. So you've got the Human Genome Project that came in. Mm-hmm. And then we've got genetics. And so we should probably define the difference between genomics and genetics. Genetics tends to study the effects of one gene.
Yes.
Like trisomy 21 or why you have blue eyes, that type of thing. But genomics is the influence of the gene upon the cell's function. Mm-hmm. And moreover, with not just replication of the cells, but the protein metabolism, which makes the pathways go, and the metabolism and different aspects of how each cell then interacts within those pathways. So it's like the functional aspects of your genes.
Exactly.
For day-to-day living, right?
Exactly. And we look at them within the cells, but like you said, the key is the pathways. And so one of the things I like to think about when you and I are looking at genomic information, we're looking for how these rabble-rousers work with the good kids in your genes. Yeah. And so the other way to think about it is if you're ever in a major city and you happen to be sitting in a stoplight and you can see all the stoplights down the same street, you think, oh my gosh, can they all turn green? If you turn green, the pathway in your body is probably working efficiently. But when you have the reds and the yellows and the greens, those are the patterns you and I look at because they can veer your biochemistry or your cellular function off track. And then we look and say, well, that maybe explain this. Let's validate that through testing or what have you. Or intuition, as you may do very well, way beyond my training, Mary. And we can literally look down these roads in your body and know where the traffic is turning down the wrong road. That's the way I like to look at it.
Yeah. And so the standard tests we do in medicine to look for magnesium levels or to look for potassium levels, that's the end product. That's here's what's floating around in the serum, or we might get it inside the red blood cell. And then, but you literally have to reverse engineer back to figure out where the track gets derailed.
Exactly. That is genomics, or that's the work we do is use that information. And I think it should be the first page in the medical record because your blueprint doesn't change. I mean, the environment does that can manipulate it, right? But my gosh, if that was the starter, cover sheet, we can always go back to that, right? Because we know the patterns in your blueprint. We know how to correct them.
So if we've got a blueprint that says when you follow all these steps, you'll get a ranch house with a walkout basement, and you follow it, you're not going to get a salt box house on the shoreline.
Correct.
You're going to get a ranch. So that's the same thing. And, it's interesting. I did a Google search to define nutrition. You'll love this. I put in definition of nutrition. In 1/2 of a second, 0.5 seconds, I got 1,170,000,000 results for a definition. And then I Googled, searched Nutrigenomics, and in 0.57 seconds, I got 120,000 results. Just the definition. So if we think of, there's so much confusion today in what we need to eat, how we need to eat. And I say, well, look, there's a bandwagon. Let's just get on, or, hey, this seems like a good idea. Or my friend said I should do this, or I read this article. But if there's over 1 billion definitions of nutrition, can you only imagine why there's so much confusion about what and how we should eat?
Correct. And, the answer to it, which is so beautiful in this space that we're sharing, is that your genome will direct what you need to eat and how you need to eat and how you need to exercise and whether you need to sleep longer or meditate longer, whatever. Your gene, that's what I said. It's like should be the cover sheet or the first page in the medical record because that is the direction of how your body is working and it never lies. So, So
you're saying we can work with ourselves and against ourselves.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, your body's like, here's my operating system. This is what I inherited. We can influence it, right? We can never change those genes. But now through our knowledge in nutrigenomics and genomics, we know how to kind of cuddle your genes, give them their best information for them to work for you because they're not working against you.
Right. They're there to support you. And, I sometimes say, well, you get to thank mom and dad for that or mom or dad, depending upon the pattern or, but so what I'm hearing you say, it seems to be the most accurate and the most proficient to know your blueprint.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Because, and we've been in this business a long time, me and nutrition and you in medicine, we know that a lot of people just have not been getting well, and that we've been treating the wrong thing. Or what about the patients or the clients we see who, I have one coming on Monday. He said, I'm doing everything right. And she really is. And I feel awful. And her lab numbers are perfect, great. Conventionally, they're great. Functionally, not bad. But she feels awful. And I'm looking at the genes, I'm like, maybe, I'm not obviously going to tell it anymore, but I can see that there's some questions that need to be asked and some tests that maybe need to run, which I can't because I'm not a doctor. But in other words, genomics helps us, as I said, look for inefficiencies that mainstream medicine and mainstream nutrition cannot find and will not find because it doesn't fit into the algorithm. And what we have to do is feel very comfortable with a blank sheet of paper in your genome and look, with our little headlights on into your genome to find those patterns that we then investigate to say, I think if we correct this, detoxification or whatever, or gut 101, we can help you move to your best person. But we pick that up because the genes will show probably how your body is operating versus a test, which is a guess at best. CBC is not going to tell you how your genome is operating. Maybe it will, maybe, some parts. So.
Well, but why don't I just do what everybody else is doing? Why don't I just go keto?
Because you really had to pick that, didn't you? So there's okay, let's
Yes,
unpack.
I did, because I get asked that every day.
Yes. Why can't we go keto? So I think it's true, Mary, like we look ancestrally and from paleolithically, most people in most societies were not eating tons of carbohydrates in the form that they're coming in cereals and tortillas and, that carb overload that we're seeing mostly in Western society. So that is true. And the body's very sensitive to that. And so I agree in reducing the glycemic load. I think you and I would agree with that. That doesn't matter whether you're keto or not. We need to do that. The issue with keto is how you organize the fats. Because, and you and I see this quite a little bit, in that you can have somebody on a higher fat keto diet, but depending on your genes, if you have issues with carnitine transportation, you can't efficiently transport that fat load into your mitochondria to burn energy. So that's one thing. Secondly, the fat makeup, we know that some people are very sensitive to different forms of fat. So you load up a lot of saturated fat, and I've got other examples. You create an even more of a cluster for these people. Right. We have genes like fatty acid binding protein that loves long-chain fatty acids, and it will sequester them. Where do you think you find them? In higher fat foods, and present them to the mitochondria to burn, and, the doors close. So we can create a lot of disruption, and there's one more gene I'm thinking of, for people when we just randomly say, do keto because so-and-so is selling a book. You and I can look and say, not so fast. Another example, like with keto, that I think of we see all the time is brilliant research out of Australia. See it all the time in the genome now. People who are doing time-restricted eating. It's great, right? I mean, it's great, and there's therapies. It's very useful. But if you go beyond 12 hours, for probably about 40% of people, if they have a variant, we call them SNPs, so SNP on genes, on a gene called PPAR alpha, and you do time-restricted eating, and they happen to be following their blood sugars at the same time, usually those people in the middle of the night will have super high blood sugars and they're eating perfectly because you're starving the body. That PPAR alpha is looking for fat, or it's looking for information to create energy. And you just said you put this gene in a straitjacket, and it's like, oh my God, my job is to find energy for the cell. I'm find energy for the cell. No fat, no protein. Great. I'm going to force the liver to make blood sugars because the brain needs glucose. So we see this in genetics, and so that kind of goes back to, you cannot randomly pick a diet off the shelf and think it's going to work for you. You may be lucky and it does, but for every person it does, there's another 40 it doesn't. And then they come to us and say, what is wrong with me? I feel terrible, or I can't lose weight, or I have brain fog, classic. So that's a long way of saying genetics helps us get to who you are through food.
Yes. I think that's an excellent example. Now, it's interesting because I also looked at that quote that has supposedly been attached to Hippocrates. Let food be thy medicine, and thy medicine be thy food. And actually, according to the historical research in medicine, he didn't really say that.
What did he say?
He said, let food be medicine, but he didn't. There's a lot of things that people are contributing to Hippocrates as one of the fathers in medicine. And yet we've got this sense of now we're taking, and I see in this space of nutrition, clinical nutrition, things that I see that are very challenging is where I think what we might call scope creep, where they go a little beyond their scope of care and their scope licensing and their credentialing. And I think well-meaning, but I think a bit misguided, where then patients come in saying, I must eat this way, I must eat that way. And then I present them with a gene test and they go, I don't want a diagnosis. I don't know. I'm not doing a gene test because I'm afraid of what it will show.
Yeah, we have to differentiate what. Yes, exactly.
So, so to be very clear, a genomic test is not a diagnostic test.
No. Nope.
It's not going to tell you you're going to have Alzheimer's. It's not going to tell you you're going to have a heart attack or you're going to have cancer. What we're looking at is, it's like saying, how is that ranch house built? Is it built with brick? Are you going to have shiplap? Are you going to have, board and batten? What are you doing? That's what you put onto the blueprint. So what you're saying is the food, the nutrients, the style of exercise, the lifestyle, even stress levels, cortisol, all those things. What's interesting, a little personal disclosure, total normal cholesterol, really bad inflammatory pathways, lined up with changes in blood vessels where cholesterol builds up with normal levels of cholesterol. Now reversing it, but not because it's an issue of cholesterol. It's an issue of inflammation.
Yes.
Right?
And
and then having been hit, unfortunately I had COVID that was really bad in 2020. That really triggered some things.
Exactly. A cascade. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for some people, we find that these inflammatory pathways, just with just a little bit of nudge, the lights go on quite quickly and they're way down in inflammation while they're still trying to do the right things.
Exactly. And you mentioned the cholesterol and inflammation, and one of the most interesting pathways that we see disrupted so much, but it's been misplaced in medicine and nutritional medicine, is the methylation pathway. Which is a whole other podcast by itself, right? Yes. But you just mentioned blood vessels, and that we look at a marker called homocysteine. Homocysteine is very, very disruptive to the blood vessels. It can really induce the inflammatory process that oxidizes LDL, and off you go. But we're not looking to correct methylation, to correct that molecule, that if we can get it under control, then it can help with cholesterol and metabolism, and also heart disease or what have you. So that's a perfect example of, it's a cycle that's not even associated with heart disease or vascular health, but it is.
Right.
But it gets misinterpreted as in the neurological space. It has a very important space there, but where genomics forces us clinically to think out of our comfort zones and to really be the detectives that we're trained to be now. I work in nutrition science. I'm a dietitian. And what's great working with doctors is I can present something and say, this is something I would consider. And off we go. I can't diagnose, like you said. Don't diagnose and they don't treat. But what's important is to be able to take this information and say, this is something I would consider. in clinical practice with a patient. So it speeds up the efficiency for you as a client or a patient, because we're not guessing, we're not ordering a bunch of tests. Well, let's just see how this comes out. Great. That's another deductible in my insurance. And it just gets rid of all that noise.
Well, it's interesting about the homocysteine, because we do in functional medicine years ago, like 20 years ago, which is, right at the last millennium, last century, right? It's back in there.
back then, right?
Back in the manual transmission days, not quite the horse and buggy days, but back in there, homocysteine, we looked at that a lot relative to cardiovascular disease.
Oh, interesting.
And we just saw that we just always said, well, that's just a function of B, some B vitamin metabolism. Mm-hmm. We need to support you. And that was the extent of we went to. Then, boom, way over on the other side, which was an overcorrection. Everyone had a MTHFR defect. And, I love what that could stand for if we could pronounce that, MTHFR. And the motherfucker gene is what people talk about with that one.
Interesting.
And yet everybody would come in and say, I have MTHFR and I'm going to die. And I'm like, no.
We all have the gene.
Yeah, because when we look at the genomics and when we look at how the genome interfaces with nutrition, it's not just a one-hit wonder.
Correct. That's a very important point.
Yeah. So
yes.
Yeah. So say a little bit more about, how the pathways, not necessarily the specifics of the pathways, but how you've got to look polygenomically.
Yes, we do.
The board. Yeah.
So let's talk about MTHFR and let's talk about the ApoE, because those are the two genes that seem to be on everyone's radar screen. So MTHFR, methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. For those of you who want to know what the acronym is, we call it MTHFR. We look at two forms of the gene anyway in a pathway, but those are just two. So it's like having birds in a nest. You never look at one gene. Because one gene cannot possibly disrupt the body unless it's a mutation, right? Which is different than what we're looking at here. We're looking at how these genes and the different colors, if you will, like traffic light, work together. So just with MTHFR by itself, we look at a number of vitamins that work we look at MTHFR. Let me back up here. Two forms of that gene. There's probably three other genes that precede those in a pathway we're looking at just to get to that point. And then what that gene does is it produces a certain form of folate that the body uses, but its job is to hand off that molecule, if you will, to homocysteine in conjunction with B12 to regenerate another amino acid. So what you're hearing me say, it's like it helps converge traffic in the body, but it has a whole bunch of other helpers. And for this process to even happen, you need vitamin B2. You need B3, which is niacin. You need B12, you heard me talk about, vitamin, zinc, and magnesium. Mm-hmm. So you can come to us and tell us all you want. You have MTHFR, and we would say, well, you'd be dead without it, which is true. But what's more important is what are the other genes in the sandbox? And what are the nutrients? And do you have those in your diet? Because you can have perfect genes, right? Nobody has perfect genes. But if you don't have the nutrients on board, which go back to diet and your gut, then all bets are off. So diet is everything. Your genes work with diet, with food. So that's one example. The other one, I think, is the ApoE. Do you want to talk about what that is? And then we'll talk about why it is like so out of whack.
No, I'm going to let you go.
So ApoE. So, if you look at APO and it's a little E, it's a gene that if you look it up in mainstream literature or mainstream like magazines, whatever, it's like, oh, if you got that gene, you're going to get Alzheimer's. You're going to go into early cognitive decline. This is the most brilliant example. There's different forms of the gene that we look at. But it's a perfect example of this gene does not work by itself. What it can do is when it's not functioning properly in a certain form, it can disrupt cholesterol metabolism. And what's interesting about that is one of the biggest hogs of cholesterol in your body is not your heart, actually, it's your brain, right? By weight, it's the largest volume of cholesterol in your body. And cholesterol, so it's really important that it gets into the brain, but it doesn't work by itself. It's just one gene. And what's very important when we look at that gene, if it's just a little bit of a rabble-rouser, is we actually look at things like how well you're handling your carbohydrates, blood sugar. We look at the homocysteine. We look at whether you can remove toxins from your body, because cholesterol has a nasty habit of carrying all your garbage with it, and it can go right into your brain, right? Because your brain needs cholesterol. It's one place. So we don't, ApoE, if it's disrupted in our minds, it's like, oh, it's not that gene. It's like, it's a protocol of how we want to look at a lot of different processes in your body. So it's like the beginning of a prescription, right? Okay, we're going to look at this. You don't die of ApoE. Right. You don't. And there's certain forms of it that are actually super, super beneficial. So we all have the gene. We all have MTHFR, but we never look at them in isolation. We look at them in clusters. Right. Is that a good explanation?
That's wonderful. And I think that that's very good for our listeners to know that when we pull these tests, when we do a genomic test, when we look at how you're wired and how you're structured, it's not a diagnostic. It is a blueprint for us to literally, so you can literally become the hero of your own journey.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
You've got your genes in one hand and you've got science in the other, and you put them together. Mm-hmm. It's just a wonderful blend.
Yeah. And I think at point, you and I, we look at reports, and then I will generate an additional like short report for my clients. Like, this is what I'm seeing. This is why I think it's happening. These are my recommendations. Yeah. But my cover sheet says, genes don't predict, they don't diagnose. They give us insights into how your body is functioning, because I can't diagnose. And like you can, and you can look at mutations. If you have a mutation that is going to predispose you, that's not my work. That is a physician's work, or a group of researchers, physician-led teams. So, but yeah.
You developed something too in your book, The Genomic Kitchen, and how to approach. We're going to go from now the laboratory and the science. We're going to bring you over into the culinary.
Yes.
Okay. Because this is also where you've done your other brilliant work, I think. And this needs to be talked about, because you've got this book, The Genomic Kitchen, and you've got a process in there, the MISE process, that is absolutely brilliant. And it's something that clients, patients, people can just learn from and put together how to structure the nutrition, the nutrigenomics specifically for themselves.
Correct. Yes.
So share with us about how you developed that, what the MISE
and the S and the E mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just going back, like we've talked a lot about genomics. So the brilliant thing about food is when you choose certain foods, it has the ability to turn genes on and off. And it is very advanced science how this does this. But imagine being able to walk into a grocery store, what your blueprint is. And you mentioned like inflammatory pathways. We know we can dial food onto your plate that can tap down. It can turn genes off that are just the bad kids in the playground. Not the bad kids, that's not fair, but the disruptive kids, right?
Yeah, right.
So we want to disrupt those. We want to prevent them from turning on so that genes can do their job that, are anti-inflammatory, if you will. So we can do this. It's like we can use food to get into the nuts and bolts of your body. And this area of science is called nutrigenomics. Yeah. So using nutrition to impact your genome, we can silence genes. Like that's very important in cancer, oncogenic genes, we can actually silence them. It is very specific.
Yeah.
We can turn them off. Yeah. And we can turn on ones that work in another way. And it's brilliant work. So we literally can write a prescription for your body, which is amazing. So not everyone gets to meet with you, Mary, or me. Mostly they're not working with people working in this space. So I developed MISE, the Genomic Kitchen, and MISE is a collection of ingredients that if you dial them onto your plate, they're going to work to turn your genes on and off. They're going to support your genes. The difference between doing that, like from a public health, just doing it without knowing, and actually knowing, is the concentration we may be working with of certain foods. And sometimes we'll use supplements too, very strategic supplements to get your body back on track, to give it a kick in the rear end. But so MISC, so mise or mise, mise actually is a French term, like mise en place is how in a professional kitchen you'd set up your station so that when it's very busy during a dining service, you've got everything you need, right, to be able to produce your part of the dish on the production line in the kitchen. But my mise, so getting everything set up, my mise is master ingredients, influencer ingredients, superfoods, and enablers. And just so you know, I've done additional work this year. I think I'm going to expand the toolbox. Yeah, which is amazing, right? So it's going to have, who knows what the acronym is going to be, but it's going to have more targets in there so people can kind of reach in a little bit deeper. But what do they do? So the M is master, and they contain, if you look, you'll see that they contain a lot of cruciferous vegetables and a lot of alliums, because in those cruciferous vegetables, we have polyphenols or bioactives. So they're not vitamins and minerals, they're not calories. And they can basically, I'll keep it very simple, but those bioactives can actually knock on the doors of your cells, if you will, and turn on pathways that help your body produce its own antioxidants, which is brilliant, with a far more efficient than anything you get in your diet. You can't eat what the cell produces, but we can set it up to produce it. At the same time, these ingredients, so those bioactives, can tamp down inflammatory pathways. So you can see what we're doing. We're using food to block and tackle in the cell, depending on what we're seeing that you need help with. So those are master ingredients. So for example, I want to give a different example with high blood pressure or hypertension. Yeah. We can look at genomics and say, you know what, if we fix or we infuse the body with specific information to really help the cycle that's helping you produce nitric oxide to expand your blood vessels, we can fire food at your bodies do that. Just say we're going to be 100% successful, but we can sure as heck try that before you have to take a medication, because we can see those inefficiencies. So Nutrigenomics has this fire information into your cells. So those are master ingredients. Those are the ones, if you ever look at this, you just want them on your plate every day, not everything. You want them in your grocery basket because they're doing the heavy lifting. So, right. So this isn't about eat your broccoli and eat all your colors. Yeah, that's true. But this is like, no, very specifically for you. Kale and cauliflower just have to be pretty important. So let's talk about how to prepare that so it works for your mouth, and it works for your budget, works for your family, and works for you. Influences is probably the most difficult part of the toolbox to understand, but it's probably where you and I tinker the most, right? It's like the influences help a cycle in your body called methylation. So the MTHFR thing we were talking about, it helps us with methylation. This is a cycle that helps produce switches or molecules that will turn on and off very important processes in your body that impact everything, like particularly in the brain and mood and, emotion.
Because methylation has over 300 different pathways. It's
incredible.
It's just a massive,
And you and I were never taught it in school, right? Like when you went to medical school, I went to University of Nutrition Science, and that just wasn't taught. I still am not sure it's being taught. Even though I'm working.
No.
And it's insane, because if you talk to a pharmacist, it's like, well, of course they know methylation. You have to understand that for medication and drugs.
Right.
So I supports this very kind of esoteric area. It has a lot of legumes in there. It also includes things like animal foods and seafood as well. So can you be vegan? Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But it's very, very specific, and it includes things like offal. Sorry, but you don't have to eat them. But this what we call sweet meats or sweet breads that, if you go up on a farm or whatever and you're harvesting animals, they do not get thrown away. This gets cycled into broths and stocks, and there's a reason for that. So no, you don't have to eat liver, but it turns out it's actually extremely useful. The S is superfoods. What is the superfoods? What I did is I said, let's stop telling people to eat this because it's rich in vitamin A or rich in calcium or rich in zinc. Where can you go to get, and it's a financial part of this, where can you go in the store to get the most vitamins and minerals per bite? Because your body needs vitamin minerals, to support all these processes, right? Genes produce proteins. Proteins do nothing without vitamins and minerals. Mm-hmm. So superfoods is like 6 or 8 in there, and it's things like garbanzo beans, sesame seeds, flax. I think lentils may be in there, but it's very specific, and it's not like, oh my gosh, would you pull these out of the sky? No, through rigorous research into nutrient databases, I kept seeing the same foods come up. It didn't matter whether I was looking for magnesium or vitamin D or vitamin C. It's like there was a set of foods that came to the top. Yeah. So that's superfoods. And E, I'm going to expand this, but E is called the enablers. And the enablers, what it really is how do you enable nutrient absorption? You can't do that if your gut's not in working order. You can't. The gut is the gateway to your body. It is probably the root of so much disruption in disease, right? Including in your brain. You and I were talking about that. So these are foods that are rich in probiotics and prebiotics. It's an area I'm going to expand as I've learned more in nutrigenomic medicine.
This is huge because we're really, when you get to the E part of your toolbox, you're really walking right into the metabolome.
You are.
I gave a lecture this week to a group of residents, and I asked if anyone knew what the metabolome was. They didn't.
No, and yet it all starts there.
Yeah, and so for our listeners, what that is, it is the friend within, and it's trillions of cells it's our bacteria that line all of our passageways. Mm-hmm. Everywhere there's mucus, there's metabolome. Everywhere there's an interface between different types of bodily fluids, there's a metabolome. So there is a metabolome in the bladder. There's one in the GI system, in our mouth, in our nasal passages, in our joints. And if we ever had an implant of any kind, there's a metabolome that goes along with that. And that's filmed and closely in conjunction with a biofilm. So you've got the metabolome and the biofilm combination. And biofilm has, good parts and bad parts. Metabolome is how we carry this cultured part of us with us. Mm-hmm. And what we're finding in the research is that actually is the primary signaler to our gut.
Exactly. And it is, period.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then what we're finding is our gut is the primary signaler out to different aspects of our body, to the brain. So we've got a gut-brain axis. Mm-hmm. So the ApoE, is that driving it or is that a receptor? Is the brain driver or the receptor? Wow, I think the brain's possibly going to be seen as a receptor. Then we go from the gut to the skin. Mm-hmm. Then we go from the gut to the hormones. So is that only the pituitary in the brain, or is the uterus more of a transducer?
Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think as we really, really unfold the human genome and look at this and see and understand the metabolome more, I think it's going to begin to shift and turn medicine in ways that it's just not a linear pathway.
Exactly.
Study this drug, a pill for an ill, a supplement for a symptom, and you're just this linear reductionistic type of mechanistic human that's walking the planet.
Now we're multidimensional, and our metabolome and our microbiome is different every day. That's what's brilliant about it. But you can control it. I mean, that's what's amazing, that we can literally prime our guts. We can set up our guts so it signals more efficiently. Like we're talking about hormones and your appetite in satiety. That mechanism is induced by the gut-brain interface, right? And how efficient your gut is and how healthy the lining of your gut is absolutely going to affect whether you feel hungry, whether you have cravings, whether you can sleep. I mean, everything starts in the gut. So the enablers is a very simplistic way of saying, hey, you need to eat foods that prime your gut. That being said, and what I'm seeing, I wrote the book in 2019. I need to kind of take it apart now because I think most people need help building their gut or rebuilding or restabilizing, reset it. So we're going to add some more information into that part because it's critical.
I totally can see how this would be something, the toolbox and toolkit that you've developed for bringing your genes into the kitchen. Wipe your feet, put on some clean jeans and get into the kitchen, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But it's cool. What you eat in the kitchen, you've got a foundation ingredients, but literally if, let's say you do have to go through antibiotic therapy, for example, some people do, we do.
Yeah. And it can save someone's life.
And save somebody's life. Exactly. I mean, it's been demonized, but, we do need to use some of these medications. But you can prime your gut before and after. You can get that gut back up and functional within a week. I mean, and without fiddling too much. Yeah. We really can. So, yeah. And so this is a tinkering from the toolbox, but the genome, the genetics that we're doing allows us to know exactly where to tinker and not do harm and, help you put your best self forward, from the inside out.
Well, it's a way too that patients can engage and care for themselves. It's a way that they can take control. It's a way that they, aren't just a victim of the system, a victim of,
Correct.
I don't think anyone's a victim of their genes unless there's strong mutations that are incompatible.
Correct. Yeah, right? No, I absolutely agree.
And we understand that that's a different thing.
Yeah.
Here we're looking at how can we take something that's this beautiful blueprint, and if we place that blueprint in how the body has the inherent capacity to heal, therefore the body's been pretty forgiving, because sometimes as folks work with you and understand the toolbox and the toolkit, they're like, man, I don't even have those tools in my box here. I have not been playing with those tools.
Well, and part of that too is the reason they're not playing with the tools is because if you look at just scan, like, I don't know, just modern magazines, and maybe there's Dietitian X saying, well, eat this, classic, eat calcium because it's good for, and then we point out a body part, right?
Right.
So body part nutrition is useless. I know, but it's true.
Like, I know. And I'm just chuckling because I'm sorry. I'm chuckling because I literally think we can, with good understanding, turn the world on its side in our approach to care for ourselves.
Exactly.
And all the things that we talked about today that were detail oriented, the simplicity we can bring it down to, and how you and I can work simplistically in a good way with patients, is we take the complexities, make it easy by saying, here's your blueprint.
Yes, exactly.
Here's foods that you need to put on your plate.
Here's how
you can cook them so they taste good to your palate. Here's the exercise you need to do with these foods. Yeah, you got to look at your stress level. Yeah, you've got some things you've got to correct because we have some abnormal labs, but we can follow those up, and we can literally, what changes are the things we track, right?
Exactly.
And so we then can work together to restore health, to achieve.
And you'll understand why.
Yeah.
I think that's right. You are empowered. You understand what the quote prescription is.
Yeah.
And you understand the goals. And that's why I kind of made the point about eat this for your body part is irrelevant. If we say, want you to try and eat cruciferous vegetables, let's find the ones that work for your palate that you're familiar with. Here's how to prepare them. And here's the why. Here's what they're going to do in your body. They're going to turn this on. They're going to trigger that. Or, and so it's a prescription to help your body pull on its innate intelligence to get you to where you want to be, which is well.
Yes.
Yeah. And this is not eat right for your body parts. I mean, that's what I decided. That's how I was educated. If you do this, it's good for your eyes. Do this, it's good for your ears. Baloney. Your eyes are different from mine, And, drink milk, it's good for your bones. I'll tell you, methylation is probably a lot better way to look at your bones and the type of exercise you're doing and how good you get this.
That's right. Because if you give a person a lot of calcium and their inflammatory pathways are turned on and they're undermethylating, guess where that calcium is going to go? Blood vessels.
Yeah. You're going to be all stiff.
And it's not going into their joints, into their soft tissue. It's not going to go into the bones.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. If you don't eat enough protein, that won't happen either. So, yes.
Right. Yeah. So looking at this from a different perspective would then cause us to say, well, since we put it that way, we should probably look at our genes, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Amanda, this has been enlightening. This has been amazing. And I think we've got to come back, plan to maybe come back and talk about the metabolome.
Yes, definitely.
It sounds like you're going to be digging into that more. And I think that can be something that can be such a really cool topic to talk about. So,
absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Right. All by itself. Yes.
Yes. Well, today, for our dear listeners, our guest has been Amanda Archibald, registered dietitian. Her book, The Genomic Kitchen, available wherever books are sold, and it's on Amazon. I did check that out. It's a great roadmap. And then I would recommend, as you dig into this book, which is very readable and it's color-coded, and it's got the MISE approach in her toolbox, to also get a genomic test.
Yes.
And as we're getting ready here to release, and maybe by the time this podcast hits the air, we have released the first part of our Hero's Genome, where you become the hero of your own journey, and looking at your genomics to establish and really, really dig into how you can best care for yourself. So thank you, Amanda, for being with us. And we look forward to speaking with you soon again.
It was a pleasure. Always fun chatting with you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on the Since You Put It That Way podcast. Today's episode was written and produced by Crowded Table Productions. Technical editing, Malin Long Ropes. Sound editing, Jonathan Fiegel. Music, The River Jordan, written and performed by May Erlewine. Please rate and review our podcast as well. We appreciate your feedback, and hey, be positive, share the love.